Hey everybody, before we get into today's retrospective, I've got an announcement to make. If you've watched enough of my videos, I think it's safe to say that you probably have a soft spot in your heart for the 90s and for anime. Well, today I'm announcing that Creator VC, the studio behind such titles as In Search of Darkness, the complete guide to 80s and 90s horror films, and FPS, the definitive first-person shooter documentary, are now venturing into brand new territory. They've begun production on Icons of Anime, a film that will delve into 80s and 90s anime and how this generation led to anime blowing up across the world. Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, Robotech, Akira, this film is planning on covering the importance and impact of each of those titles and so many more, with interviews from creators and fans alike. However, before this film can get made, they need your help. Down in the description below, you will find a link to a survey where you can tell them what you would like to see in the film. Is there a series that you think is important and you want to see them cover? Want them to talk about how certain animes blew up in specific regions? Let them know what you want to see in this film in that survey in the description down below. And that's it. There is nothing to buy, no money to spend. Just take a small survey and you can not only help them structure this documentary, you'll also let them know how many people are interested in this film, and that lets them know how big their budget should be, or how big their reach should be, or how many people should be involved in this. Trust me, it might not seem like much, but filling out surveys like this have a big impact on how films like this get made. In fact, I know they do, because this isn't even the first time that we teamed up with Creator VC Studios. A few years back, we promoted a survey for their film on horror video games, Terabyte, and I can tell you from the conversations I have had with those filmmakers, you all came through and showed up for that survey, so I'm asking you all to please do it again. Also, speaking of Terabytes, I actually got to be in that documentary in episode 5, and I can't tell you how happy that made me. I am a huge fan of these guys, so being in one of their films was a dream of mine. I am not going to be in this one, though. Do not fill out that survey thinking that you're going to see me pop up in the movie. I will not be in Icons of Anime. I am solely promoting it today because I just really like these guys and want to support them. Important thing to remember, Icons of Anime, new documentary, they need your show support to get it made. All you have to do is fill out the survey that you see in the description down below or on the screen right here. Help them out and I will be very thankful. But now, let's set sail for today's video. We've been doing these fighting game retrospectives for a couple of years now, and we've covered a wide range of games. We've done 2D fighters, 3D fighters, 2D fighters. Okay, now that I think about it, maybe we haven't covered that much. Well, let's fix that today. Fighting games aren't just 2D or 3D. There's more to this genre than just a test of your depth perception. There are so many subgenres to fighting games. There's arena fighters, platform fighters, tag fighters, team fighters, and then there's the trailblazers. Those games who create something entirely new, something that can't fit into any pre-established mold. Games like that are important because they keep fighting games feeling new. They encourage creativity and show just how vast and varied this genre can be. And because these games are more experimental, you typically find them from smaller, more independent developers who have that freedom to just go off in strange directions. But in the late 90s, a team from Capcom came together and created something completely new. Something unlike anything else on the market, and it would go on to be one of the most beloved casual games I have ever seen, with a fan base that is still asking for a new installment to this day. So get ready to set sail for adventure as we enter the world of Power Stone.
In the 19th century, people are strong believers in superstition and legend. Adventurers who seek fortune and glory search the world for a legendary treasure which has the power to make any dream come true. That treasure is known as the Power Stone.
Welcome, fighting game fans, to a brand new retrospective, and I don't mind telling you, I have been looking forward to this one. And not just because it's only got 2 games with a very simple lore, and after doing those last couple retrospectives, I could definitely use something simple. No, I love this game, and if I have the chance to spread the word of Power Stone, I'm going to take it. But before we get into everything, I want to give a big thank you to the artist of the thumbnail today, Kevin Fagaragan. Kevin is a legendary artist. I have been a fan of his work for years, and it was amazing getting a chance to work with him on this video. Make sure to go and follow and support him. You can find the link to all of his info in the description down below. Normally I wait until the end of the video to shout out the artist, but I realized recently, a lot of people probably tune out the moment I'm done talking about the game and they never hear me talk about the artist, so yeah, from now on we're just going to start shouting out the artist at the start of the video. They deserve it. But let's jump into our story today by heading back to the peak of fighting game popularity, the 90s. Well, actually, we're looking at the end of the 90s, when the arcade scene was starting to dry up, and as we have discussed previously on this show, this led some developers to wonder what the future could hold. How do we keep players invested? Do we stick with the arcades, or do we go just to home consoles? Competitive players seem to be growing, should we focus on them? What do casual players want? Are 2D fighting games dead? This led to a lot of new ideas and new titles, and Capcom was right there in the kitchen trying to cook something up. Previously, Capcom had been the king of the arcades, but as the decade came to a close, their fighting game properties were on shaky grounds. Street Fighter III had been a flop and wouldn't be appreciated for many more years to come. Darkstalkers was getting sequels canceled left and right, so Capcom decided to get really experimental. They started testing out 3D games, reinventing what tag fighters were, started courting multiple third parties at the same time, whatever the heck you want to classify Red Earth as. Yeah, Capcom kinda just loaded a bunch of ideas into a shotgun and then fired them out in every direction hoping that something would hit. But I find this weird handful of years for Capcom to be admirable. It felt like anyone could step up and throw out a brand new idea, and maybe they'd have a shot at getting it made. And one such developer was Takeshi Tezuka. No, that's Takashi Tezuka. I said Takeshi Tezuka. There, that's better. Sorry, I had to clarify that real quick because over the past couple of months as I have researched for this video, every single time that I looked up Tezuka, I always had to clarify with the search engine, no, I do not mean the Legend of Zelda guy. Takeshi Tezuka originally joined Capcom in 1990, where he worked on arcade games, probably his most notable titles being Cadillacs and Dinosaurs and the early Marvel games, which means he had experience working on fighting games. And with that on his resume, Capcom eventually bumped him up to the role of producer and allowed him to craft his own original title. And he knew he wanted to make a fighting game, but one that was completely different from anything else on the market. You see, despite having a love for the genre, Tezuka expressed a lot of dismay with the current landscape of fighting games. He thought it was getting a bit stale, games were too similar, and they were slowly pushing out the casual audience in favor of a more competitive crowd. In an interview with Dreamcast magazine, which lets you know how old this interview is, Tezuka said, quote, "Over time, the fighting game scene has unfortunately evolved further and further into something for maniac-level experts. With Power Stone, I wanted to once more try and return fighting games to the masses and create an open game with that appeal." So Tezuka had two goals. One, create something completely different, and two, create something aimed specifically at the casual audience. And joining Tezuka was his director, Hideaki Itsuno. Now, if you remember from our Street Fighter retrospective, you might recall that Itsuno got his start at Capcom as a planner on Street Fighter Alpha, a position that he got because the Alpha team was given only 3 months to make that game, while all the other experienced fighting game devs were off working on other games. And then Itsuno's boss saw him playing King of Fighters 94 in the break room and said, "Screw it, you at least know what a fighting game is. You're going to help us plan the follow-up to our most successful game ever." I kid you not, that story is true. Watch the Street Fighter retrospective for more details. Point is, I don't know of any other developer who had a bigger baptism by fire than this guy, but it seemed to work out. He got the guidance that he needed during the making of that game, and he went on to become a huge face for the company, going on to work on Rival Schools, Capcom vs. SNK, Dragon's Dogma, and all the best Devil May Cry games. Now to clarify, there was another director on this game, Tatsuya Nakai, and he did have plenty of experience on fighting games himself, and of course there were plenty of planners and other people with influence, but based on the interviews that I've read, it really sounds like a lot of the ideas, inspiration for, and success of this game largely came from Itsuno and Tezuka. Probably because Itsuno actually agreed with Tezuka's thoughts on the fighting game scene. When it came to Power Stone's mission statement, the two of them were pretty much in sync. In an interview with The Guardian, Itsuno said, quote, "One of my aims with Power Stone was to bring my experience to something that would be well received by players other than just hardcore fighting game fans. Fighting games had become incredibly niche, and ordinary gamers were no longer able to keep up. It is crazy to me that we hear people having this argument every single year. It feels like every few months, something new causes the entire FGC to start arguing, are fighting games too niche? Are they a bad product? How do we bring this to the casual players? And here we had Itsuno saying the exact same thing almost 30 years ago, less than a decade after fighting games became a thing. Time is a flat circle. So the team got to work on this new game, and originally it was going to be your typical 3D fighter. Capcom had recently seen moderate success from a handful of those 3D games, so it was understandable that they were trying to replicate it. But it didn't feel right to Tezuka and Itsuno. In that interview with Dreamcast Magazine, Tezuka said, "I'd always felt the so-called 3D fighting games are, at their essence, really just 2D games. And I thought that we finally reached that point with the hardware technology that a proper, real, three-dimensional game could be realized." Great! One question. What the heck is he talking about? What exactly was a real three-dimensional game? I mean, sure, you're all here with me in the future. You all know what he was envisioning. You've been looking at it on the screen this entire time. But back then, this was a bold new direction, and even Tezuka wasn't really sure what he wanted. For the first half of this game's development, it was your typical 3D fighter. Each character faced each other, you double-tapped in a direction to move into or out of the background, but eventually they decided to experiment with the full space of the game, and they pulled the camera out and placed it overhead rather than side by side with the characters, and that's when they realized that they could really explore these stages in ways that we had never seen before. It opened the whole game up, movement became more free and a much more vital part of the actual gameplay. This really was the pulling the sword out of the stone moment for this game. Both Tezuka and Itsuno said that the moment they pulled the camera back, it felt just right. It was exactly what they were looking for, and it no longer played like any other fighting game. I mean, sure, in all fairness, there were other three-dimensional fighting games out there that did experiment with the camera, such as the Psychic Force series, and of course... that one. But none of them used the camera in a way that showed off this much of the arena, and allowed you to explore this much of the stage. And as you will see as we go on, that would indeed be important to the actual gameplay, as well as establishing the identity of Power Stone. So after figuring out what this game should look and feel like, development sped along, and it sounded like for the most part it went fairly smoothly. Except for one question. Where was this game going to launch? Now most of you already know the answer to this. It was made for the Dreamcast. Heck, I'd even argue it's one of the core third-party titles that people associate with that console. But that wasn't always the plan. No, originally, Power Stone was being made for, drumroll please, the Panasonic M2. I can't see any of your faces, but I can guarantee you're all having the correct reaction to this reveal. Yeah, so what the hell was the Panasonic M2, you might be asking? Well, the Panasonic M2 was originally going to be known as the 3DO2 because it was going to be the follow-up to the 3DO. Now, that probably leads into your second question. What the hell was the 3DO? The 3DO was a console in the mid-90s made by, surprise surprise, the 3DO company, and it had multiple manufacturers including Panasonic. But unfortunately, nobody really wanted a 3DO. Hell, I didn't even want a 3DO, and I wanted an Atari Jaguar. That's how low my standards were. I'm not going to go into the history of the 3DO, it's its own weird thing, but the point is, they were attempting to launch a brand new console. Capcom signed up to develop Power Stone for the system, but as development went along, the team at Capcom huddled together and said, "Guys, I don't think this 3DO thing is ever going to come out." So they quickly pivoted to find a new place to release the game, and hey, you know what? Good instincts, because the 3DO2 did indeed get cancelled before it released. Granted, the next place you went was the Dreamcast, so maybe your instincts weren't that good, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Now this meant pivoting to a brand new hardware, and the devs had to learn how to work with the Sega Naomi arcade board. However, shockingly, this wasn't much of a problem. The team found the Naomi to be a fairly easy system to work with, and it was pretty advanced, allowing them to take whatever ideas they had and bring them to life. Tezuka told The Guardian, quote, "Creating a new kind of fighting game on brand new hardware made every day exciting." And he must have meant that because after this, Capcom would continue to put out multiple games for Naomi hardware, and because Naomi wasn't just the hardware for the Dreamcast, but also for Sega's arcade machines, it meant that this game and several other titles that were originally going to be console only were now going to receive arcade ports, extending Capcom's run at the arcades at a time when other companies were starting to jump ship without them having to do a ton of extra work. It is wild to think that this partnership and all the games that came as a result of it was all formed because the 3DO crashed out. However, as positive as all this sounded, as much praise as Tezuka was lavishing upon the Naomi system, swapping over to the Dreamcast did provide its own unique problems. First, as I mentioned, it was great that since Naomi was in their arcade machines and in the Dreamcast, it meant they could now put out 2 releases of this game, but it also meant they now had to make 2 releases of this game. And we don't know the specifics of the development time, but Tezuka did mention that was fairly tight. So even if it was an easy port, it was still a port they hadn't planned on making. However, that is small potatoes compared to the big problem with switching to the Dreamcast, which was this little monstrosity. Yeah, Dreamcast discs were built on GD-ROMs, and if you know anything about the Dreamcast, it's how bad the GD-ROMs were. For starters, they were incredibly easy to pirate. How easy? This is not a real copy. I literally bought a pirated copy of Power Stone off Etsy to show off in this video just to prove a point. A lot of people say this actually was one of the reasons the Dreamcast died because everyone was just pirating their games, which is partly true. Not because so many people pirated the disc that meant nobody was actually buying them, but more of that developers were scared to port their games to the Dreamcast when they knew that everyone could just steal it. But there was another reason that these discs were a problem, because being so flimsy that they were easy to crack also meant they were so flimsy it was hard to burn the initial game onto the disc. In an interview with Brazilian website Titan Game Studio, Tezuka got a little more open with the struggles of this development. He said that at that time, Capcom's work days typically started at 9 a.m. and would go all the way to midnight. So they spent all that time actually developing the game, then they would have to burn what they just programmed onto a disc overnight in order to test it out. But because these discs were so bad, they would constantly run into problems during this step. So Tezuka would work from 9 a.m. to midnight, start burning the disc, which would typically take about 4 hours, but instead of setting it to burn and then leaving, he would just take a nap, set his alarm for 4 a.m., and then wake up and see if the disc actually came out okay, or if he had to redo the whole thing. And on top of that, remember, they were still working on brand new hardware. Yes, they did say that the Naomi board was easy to learn, but they still had to learn it. But unfortunately, Sega at this time divided their workforce into various shifts, and the people who knew how to help their partners with the Naomi boards didn't start work until midnight. Meaning if during their 15-hour shift making this game, the Capcom team ran into any kind of problem, Tezuka couldn't ask Sega for help because their customer service didn't clock in until the witching hour. This poor man probably didn't see the sun for like 4 months. By the way, fun fact. Well, okay, maybe not fun fact. Nothing about what I just described sounds fun. But interesting fact. Most of the interviews I found with Tezuka where he talked about this game's development were close to its release. This interview with Titan Game Studio was from 2021, long after he stopped working for Capcom, and you can practically feel the difference in his tone. 25 years ago, his interviews were all, "Oh, Naomi's great and it's an amazing game to use this brand new technology." Cut to 2021. "Oh, you want to know what it was like making games for the Dreamcast? I'll tell you what it was like making games for the Dreamcast." Well, despite Capcom and Sega doing everything they could to drive Tezuka and his team insane, they still managed to release the game. As I've said many times, this was a big, bold experiment. They wanted to create something brand new, something that could appeal to the casual audiences out there. And they nailed it.
In the 19th century, people are strong believers of superstition and legend. Adventurers seek the world for fortune, glory, and a legendary treasure which has the power to make dreams come true. That treasure is known as the Power Stone.
Welcome to Power Stone War.
Power Stone released in Japan in February 1999 and in North America on September 9th, just in time for the Dreamcast Big 9999 release. It would serve as a launch title for the Dreamcast in North America, and this game was a console seller, and I mean that literally. I remember the first time I saw Power Stone, I went into an electronics boutique, had no idea what Power Stone was, had no idea what a Dreamcast was. I just walked into the store and they had a Japanese version of the console set up, and they had a copy of Power Stone set up for anyone to try, and I cannot tell you how much my mind melted over this. The second I put my hands on the controller, I immediately said, wow, this is a really weird controller. Why would anyone design it like this? But after taking a second to get used to it, I then said, this feels so incredibly fun to play. I only got about 5 minutes with it, but that was all I needed. I pre-ordered the Dreamcast that very day. Part of that was because of how the game looked. Sure, today this is very dated, but at the time, this was a massive leap in graphics. We had spent the last few years looking at jagged polygons, and hey, listen, not saying that made the games bad, no, not at all. But we didn't think video games were capable of anything more than that. So seeing these fully fleshed out 3D characters was like looking at something from the future. Let's start with the basics. This is a 3-button fighter. Or a 4-button fighter. Or maybe a 2-button? It all depends on what you're counting. You had a punch button, a kick button, then you could hit punch and kick together to do a throw, although most controllers just gave throw its own button. And lastly, you had the jump button. And that's it, fairly simple, although originally the game was going to have 6 buttons, but as I have pointed out several times, the goal of this game was to make it something unlike any other fighting game and to make it aimed at casual players who don't normally touch fighting games. And giving Power Stone 6 buttons made it feel too much, well, like a fighting game, if that makes sense. 6 buttons just made the game too focused on remembering combos and remembering what you could link into what, and this made it lean too much into a competitive playstyle, so they then overcorrected and made it only a 2-button fighter, punch and jump. But then it became too boring, so they added in a kick button, and now it not only provides some variety, but it also gave it this feeling of customization and expression. That feeling that players now had a choice in what button they wanted to hit rather than just hammering away at the punch button. But in case only 2 attack buttons sound bland, don't worry because this is where Power Stone opens up the spice rack. As I said, the developers didn't want this game to feel like just a normal 3D fighter, so they pulled the camera back and placed it higher up so that way it could capture the entire arena. But what made the gameplay so special wasn't just that you could see the whole arena, it's that you could use the whole arena. You weren't tied to your opponent, you had free reign to just run around wherever you wanted, and these stages are essentially giant jungle gyms. There's multiple layers you can hop on, stairs to climb, you can grab on poles in the middle of the stage or even cling to the ceiling, and certain characters have their own unique traits that affect how they can interact with the stage. For instance, lighter characters can spin around on poles and fire themselves at the opponent, while the stronger characters will just pick that pole out of the ground and swing it like a baseball bat. And even if the stage has nothing to interact with, you can just interact with your opponent, flipping over them or sliding completely around them, a mechanic that Itsuno brought over from his previous Rival Schools games. Throw all this together and this game can get incredibly chaotic. On some of these stages, you're jumping more than you're walking. It can feel like you're 2 flies trying to swat each other out of the air. But you are still connected to your opponent. So if you want to start swinging or do a dive kick, you'll automatically face them, making it so your movement has freedom, but it still functions as a fighting game. But here's where the game really opens up. I said you have 2 attack buttons, but that's not entirely true. There's actually like, I don't know, 30 attacks? That's because the whole stage is littered with items. Sometimes it's part of the stage, like a table or a chair, something that you would expect to find in these settings, but then other times a treasure chest will just appear at random and a weapon will emerge, like a sword, a flamethrower, a pipe, a gun, a bomb, or just a flat-out bazooka when you absolutely positively have to blow up your opponent no matter what. And you can pick these items up and toss them across the stage, again, homing in on your opponent's direction, but if you're quick enough, you can actually grab these items out of the air and then throw them back. According to The Guardian, Itsuno was the one to thank for this game's tone and the finer details of the gameplay, and they reported that he was inspired by Indiana Jones, which can be seen in some of the characters and the stages, but he was also inspired by Jackie Chan movies they watched as a kid, and seeing how much you're jumping around the stage and how many random items you can pick up and toss across the screen? Yeah, I believe it. All of this combined with mobility and the various layouts of the arenas and the stage hazards made this an incredibly kinetic game. You are constantly moving, and that's exactly what they wanted you to do. They designed the game to encourage it even, because you might be asking, wait, if you have free running in this game, and you aren't tied to your opponent, then you can't block by holding back. And you didn't mention a block button. So how do you block? That's the fun part. You don't. Yes, I know I'm just doing the joke from Invincible, but I'm being serious. That is the fun part. I said this game wants you to constantly be moving. You know what's really good motivation for that? When you can't block. When your opponent starts firing at you, you have to dip, duck, dodge, and dive your way to safety. If your opponent launches a wave of attacks in your direction, you better start parkouring for your life. Or stand behind a post and hope the AI is too stupid to move. Both work. And again, this was all intentional. They specifically left blocking out of the game to keep it feeling fresh. In that Dreamcast magazine interview, Tezuka said, "It was the removal of a guard block button, however, that most decisively broke us free from the fighting game mold. If we left blocking in, I think Power Stone would just be seen as yet another also-ran in the lineage of versus fighting games." He went on to say that taking out blocking made the game more focused on macro-level tactics rather than micro-level tactics, and when you play the game, you understand what he means. This isn't a game about footsies. No, it's a game about, hey, a crate is flying at your head, can you get out of the way in time? And it all works. It feels so good to just run and dodge attacks that I kid you not, I've been playing this game since 1999, and I didn't even think about the fact that there's no blocking in this game until I read that interview. Then again, maybe that says less about Power Stone and more about just how I approach fighting games.
I feel bad for you.
I don't think about you at all.
And all this comes together to create an experience that is, quite simply, fun. And a lot of that comes down to the tone of the game. Characters are bright and colorful, their designs are simple and soft enough that it feels charming. They're instantly identifiable. You see this cocky pilot guy and you immediately understand what he's all about. And on top of that, these fighters behave like cartoon characters. You can hit your opponent with a big mallet and they'll be flattened on the ground. Someone can hop on your head and you'll be crumpled up like an accordion. If you knock someone into a wall, then a bunch of barrels will start falling on them. This animated attitude is one of the defining elements of the game. You couldn't make a Power Stone if it didn't have this tone. But there is one big mechanic in Power Stone that I haven't mentioned yet. The Power Stones. Yeah, you've been watching the gameplay this entire time. You knew we had to discuss this because it's literally what everything in the game revolves around. When the match starts, you and your opponent will have one Power Stone each. Then, after an amount of time, a third Power Stone will appear. Now, you can make your opponent lose a stone by hitting them with a heavy enough attack, at which point it will go flying across the screen. And if you manage to collect all three of the stones, you will then transform into your super form, known as Power Change. And I love these transformations. Each of them have this over-the-top superhero vibe while matching the personality of each of the characters. Like Edward Falcon is clearly a pilot. He's supposed to have this old-timey, high-flying captain of the skies look to him, so of course, the moment he transforms, he turns into an Iron Man-style living fighter jet. Jack is clearly some kind of a violent killer. He's wrapped up in bloody bandages, he's got one sinister eye poking out, he has this malicious laugh, he fights with knives. The moment he transforms, he's just a walking saw blade. Rouge is a fortune teller with some clear belly dancer inspirations to her design, and she ends up transforming into a flaming spirit almost like a djinn. Each of their starting designs are good, they're fun, they match the tone, but these power change forms are amazing. They are what people remember about this game. After you enter Power Change, your two basic attack buttons will now fire out big damaging moves. Instead of punches and kicks, you're now firing out rockets, ninja stars, giant Kamehameha blast. But you'll have a timer that's slowly dropping, and with each attack, it drops even faster, typically only giving you time for about 2 combos. But at any point, you can hit your jump and either punch or kick together to do one of your 2 big super moves. And once you do this move, you will instantly be knocked out of your Power Change form. So typically, you have enough time to do 2 combos, and then with the tiny sliver of time you have left, you can finish things off with your big super. Now, if you've been looking up at the top of the screen this whole time, you might have noticed that your normal attacks do pretty middling damage. In fact, it even gives you a little bit of life that you can recover back. But in Power Change, you melt the opponent's life bar. Now, I've heard many people criticizing this game for saying that the super forms are too strong, and because the gems are almost always available, it means that this game pretty much just boils down to who can get the Power Stones first. And yeah, that is totally correct. But I don't think that's a critique, I think that's the entire point of the game. It's like criticizing Sonic the Hedgehog for going too fast, or Mario for jumping too much. As I keep repeating, they want this game to be very different from any other fighting game. And while you still win by decreasing your opponent's life points to 0, that almost feels like the secondary objective. From the moment the match starts, your goal is to collect the Power Stones. And remember how I said that running and jumping feels so good in this game? That's largely because you're trying to get these stones. In other words, the game gives you a reason to do all that running and jumping. The point of the game and the cool stuff you do in the game are completely in sync. In that interview with Dreamcast Magazine, Tezuka addressed this by saying they wanted the stones to be strong so you would have a reason to collect them. In other words, if your power change form didn't make you feel really strong, you'd just stand there and punch and kick the opponent, once again, making this just a normal fighting game. He added on to this saying, quote, "Making the stones very powerful has a positive effect too. It adds a second strategic layer to the game of trying to stop your opponent from collecting them, and also makes you think, how can I survive this if your opponent does get them all?" And he's right, a lot of the tension in this game comes from seeing your opponent running for that third gem, and you have to figure out how you can stop them in time. And the push and pull dynamic of you get a gem, then your opponent knocks it out of you, and then they get the gem, and then you have to knock it out of them, and now both of you are running for it at the exact same time. This game might not look it, but it can get incredibly sweaty. And when your opponent does transform, it's like you just got hit with a sudden impromptu boss fight. It feels overwhelming. But at the same time, it's not a one-shot kill. You don't just get the stones and then you win. No, for starters, it's pretty impossible to beat your opponent with just one use of the stones. Your timer will run out before you can do that. Then the stones will fire out of you, giving your opponent a head start to collect them for themselves. But more importantly, again, this game is built around jumping and dodging your opponent's attacks. And as strong as power change is, guess what? You can still jump and dodge the attacks. You have to be really good at it, you have to focus, but it is totally doable. Even their big, massive board-clearing super moves can still be dodged, and when you manage to pull that off, you feel untouchable. You feel like Neo and you can see the Matrix, and now you're just dodging everything that comes at you. Then again, if you happen to be on the other end of that exchange, here's hoping nobody was watching you. You think whiffing a super feels bad? Wait until you whiff a super that takes up half the screen in a game where the opponent can't block. But this is a fighting game. You don't want to just dodge their super state until it runs out. No, you want to actually fight back. And guess what? You can. You just have to be a little careful about it. You see, in Power Change, characters have armor on all their attacks, so you don't want to just run in there and start comboing. That's a real easy way to get your butt kicked. But you can still hit the opponent with items from afar. And what's the weakness to all characters with armor? Throws. Yes, even in Power Change form, characters are still vulnerable to throws. Heck, you can even interrupt your opponent's big super by throwing them out of it. And anytime that you deal damage to a character in Power Change, they lose some of their remaining time. Meaning, if you get Power Change, you might feel unstoppable, but if your opponent knows this game inside and out, they can knock you out of it pretty quickly. So you might look at the footage of this game and think that it doesn't involve a ton of skill, which, granted, is easy to think when the developers kept saying over and over again they didn't want this to be aimed at competitive audiences, but I assure you, there are strategies to this. This is a game that anyone can pick up and instantly start playing. I have seen a group of people who don't touch fighting games at all pick this game up, instantly figure it out, and have a great time playing it. But if you want to learn the tech of this game, there is tech to learn. All this comes together to create a fighting game that is full of variety, of creativity, and is all around unique. And a lot of what made this possible is that the team behind this game came from different corners of Capcom. Itsuno told The Guardian, it all started with the idea of developing a game using a team that mixed arcade developers and console developers. We wanted a project that could bring the strengths of both sides. The arcade guys were great at making fighting games, and the console guys were experts at creating 3D games. And I love that. I love that idea that someone who knew how to make fighting games teamed up with someone who knew how to make a platformer, and then maybe someone from the beat-em-up division came in and said, hey, you need to know how to use items in your game and how to pick up objects and throw them at the opponent? That's my entire thing! This really was such a creative game where it felt like they were just free to come up with whatever idea they want, and this wasn't all they originally had planned. At one point, Itsuno wanted to get even crazier with it and include a first-person mode, a mode where every item was a bomb, which would be added to the PSP port years later on, and a puzzle mode where the Power Stones were high up on a stage and you had to figure out how to stack blocks in order to reach them, which means I think this game almost invented competitive Catherine. Although they did fit a few extra modes into this game thanks to the Dreamcast memory card, the VMU. Yeah, for anyone who never experienced the joys of Dreamcast ownership, in the 2 years that it was alive, this console came with a big chunky memory card that you shoved into the controller, and each game could download little portable games into the memory card that you could play on the go. Man, I really need to do a Dreamcast retrospective one day. What a wild little console. But we've been talking all this time about the mechanics of Power Stone, the gameplay. What exactly is the premise of Power Stone, and who are these characters that you're controlling? Well, in the 19th century, strange gems known as Power Stones have appeared all around the world that can bestow people with great power. But there is one giant Power Stone that is said to be able to grant whoever holds it their heart's desire. And so adventurers from around the world set out to find it. And yeah, that's kind of it. Don't get me wrong, each character has their own individual backstories, but after doing that Under Night retrospective a few months ago, it is refreshing to be able to fit a game's entire premise into a tweet. Although if you do want a few more details, originally this game was going to be set in the modern day, but Itsuno said that didn't feel right. It didn't give the game any personality. He said that he felt modern technology just had no charm to it. So that's why they changed it to the 19th century. Also, remember how I said that the Guardian claimed part of Itsuno's inspiration was Indiana Jones? This is about a bunch of adventurers in the past traveling around the world to go into tombs and find treasures. Yeah, I think they might have been onto something with that. But there were 8 playable characters in this roster, as well as 2 unlockable bosses. First up, the face of the franchise, Edward Falcon. Or as he is known in Japan, Edward Fokker. Yes, in Japan, the main character's last name is Fokker. There, I said it. You can all stop spamming it in the comments right now. But because Edward Falcon is more commonly used for this character, and also I don't want to risk this video getting age restricted, I'm going to stick with that. He's a British pilot who is trained in classic boxing, and he comes from the city of Londo. Not London. Londo. Yeah, each of the locations in this game are just a letter or 2 off from actual real-world locations. It's a small thing, but I don't know, I think it's charming. Edward has a love for adventure, setting out to find the legendary Power Stone so that way he can be just like his father, the famous archaeologist, Pride Falcon. Again, really starting to believe those claims that Indiana Jones might have been an influence on this game. Also, one last detail that I love, on the back of his jacket is a depiction of Michelle Hart from the classic Capcom arcade game Legendary Wings. I don't know who at Capcom was a huge fan of this character, but in the late 90s, she was making cameos in so many of their fighting games. Then arguably the second most famous character in the game, Rouge. Hailing from Madad, which is this game's version of Baghdad, she's a fortune teller who uses dancing style attacks, and she's seeking the Power Stones because she wants to use them to bring happiness to others. So if she wins, she uses the Power Stones to set up a booth where she grants other people's wishes. Oh, that's nice. Now for the total opposite of that, we come to Jack. Jack was based on Jack the Ripper, and that tells you all you need to know about him. He is a crazed serial killer from Manchester, based on Manchester, and he is a total mystery. Some say he's 40 years old, some say he's over 100. Everything about his design is so creepy. That bandaged face, that laugh he does, the fact that he doesn't actually run across the stage, instead he does this spider walk. And when he goes into his power change form and he does his big super attack, arcane symbols appear on the ground. Everything about him just has this air of mystery and feels supernatural. And if he wins and gets all the Power Stones, his wish is just to make a double of him that can take the fall for all his crimes, so that way he can keep killing people. Next, we're heading to Tokyo, or more accurately, Oedo, which is a reference to Edo, the original name of Tokyo. Bet you didn't think you'd be getting a history lesson in this video. Here we got Ayame, who is the interject star of a traveling band of performers, but secretly she comes from a long line of ninjas, and she's actually out to obtain the Power Stone for her master. Although in her ending, she finds the Power Stone but decides, nah, I'm just going to keep it myself. So she gives her lord a worthless rock and keeps the real Power Stone for herself. Then we have Ryoma, a samurai from the village of Mutsu, which is a reference to... Wait, Mutsu is an actual village? Why was that okay, but every place else had to be legally distinct? Whatever. Ryoma is probably the most classic fighting game character in this game because he just wants to find and fight tough opponents, and that's it. He doesn't even want the Power Stone. In his arcade ending, he just destroys the stone and then embarks to find his next opponent. Also, this is just a speculation, but when he gets all 3 stones, his power change form is a suit of silver armor, and a lot of people are wondering if this is based on the X-Men villain Silver Samurai, which feels like a stretch, until you remember that Takeshi Tezuka worked on Children of the Atom, which featured Silver Samurai. So, yeah, maybe there is something to that theory. Also, have to point this out, Takeshi Tezuka said that he worked on Children of the Atom, but his name doesn't appear anywhere in the credits, which might seem suspicious until you remember that back in the 90s, Capcom and many other Japanese game studios would either not include their employees in the credits, or they would make them use fake names so that way their competition wouldn't try to recruit them. Yeah, game development in the 90s was, not fun. Not really fun these days either, but we'll save that topic for another video. Next is Wong Tong, who hails from Tong'an, which I think is based on the Tong'an district of China. Yeah, from here the towns get a little hard to figure out, but this feels like a safe bet. Wong Tong is an optimistic young martial artist who is trying to recover the Power Stone for his master, but in reality, his master doesn't care about the Power Stone. He just wants Wong Tong to go out there and explore the world and test his skills. Also, I mentioned that Ryoma kinda resembles the Silver Samurai. Well, Tezuka has commented that any resemblance to other characters is coincidental. He simply wanted to create a character who could represent certain classic archetypes, so that's why they might seem similar to other characters. And Wong Tong clearly represents the famous archetype of martial artist whose hair goes blonde when they enter their super state, and now they can launch out massive energy attacks and giant bombs that appear to be made of some kind of spirit. Yep. Not based on anything that I can tell, totally original OC, do not steal. Next, we're going to one of the big bruisers of the game, Gunrock. He comes from Don Volta, which I don't actually know what this is based on. Going off his location on the map and his ending, it appears that he comes from either Latin America or the Old West, but I can't figure out what, if anything, the name Don Volta is supposed to be a tribute to, so if you have a guess, let me know in the comments down below. Gunrock is great. He's a big, jovial miner, and when he gets the Power Stones, he just uses it to win games of poker and then uses his winnings to buy drinks for everyone. Now this is a man I would trust with phenomenal cosmic powers. And I already mentioned that Ryoma might be paying tribute to a Marvel character. Well, when Gunrock goes into power change, his body turns into a giant rock man, and this is actually based on the Thing from the Fantastic Four. I always heard people speculating on this, and I just thought, nah, they're probably just based on a generic big rock man. Marvel Comics doesn't have a monopoly on that. That is a recurring thing from many different stories. However, when researching for this video, I found out that in the 1960s Fantastic Four cartoon, the Thing's name was localized in Japan to Gonrock. So yeah, rumor confirmed, it is safe to say that Gunrock is based on Gonrock. And last but certainly not least, we head to North America for Goluda. Goluda comes from Dollstown, which I can guarantee you is not based on anything. That is just a fun, silly name. He's a kind-hearted shaman who abhors violence, but when a one-handed man brings an illness to his village, he must set out to find the Power Stones to save his people. You know, it's just occurring to me right now, literally as I'm recording this, there are only 2 characters in this roster who actually want the Power Stones for a good reason. Goluda wants to save his people and Rouge wants to actually help others. Everyone else is just like, I don't know, I thought it'd be cool. This is not the most altruistic cast of characters. But back to the script, yes, Goluda is trying to save his people because of an illness that was brought to them by a one-handed man. Who could this one-handed man be? Why don't we ask the mid-boss, Kraken. Kraken is the captain of a ship and he is searching for the Power Stone so that way he can pull a pirate to the Caribbean and raise a whole army of ghosts in order to take over the 7 seas. Aside from that, yeah, not much else to this guy. Also, I just want to say, Kraken might have the best stage in this game. There's so many things that you can interact with, there's so much that you can climb and jump on, there's so many things that you can hide behind to avoid attacks, there's stage hazards. This one's just really well done. This is everything that a Power Stone stage should be. But now we come to the final boss, Valgus. Valgus was a soldier who found out about the Power Stones from one of his subordinates, and then he set out to find it and take the power for himself. Although when I was a kid, I always thought that Valgus was supposed to be a wrestler, because not only does he have the bright blue spandex pants with lightning bolts on them that feel like they would be right at home in SummerSlam, but this dude loves to pick you up and smack you down. There is no such thing as a grappler in this game simply because of how it's designed, but if Valgus was ever ported to another game, you know how he'd fight. I always love Valgus. He is insanely powerful, dealing as much damage in his base form as other characters do in their power change form, and his design is basic, but it is super memorable. I can totally see an alternate reality where Power Stone took off and this guy is standing side by side with M. Bison and Wesker and Sigma and all the other classic Capcom bad guys. He would be right at home with them. Now, if you look closely at Valgus' design, you'll notice that he has one Power Stone already around his neck. It's implied that this is the one that his soldier informed him about and what caused him to go out on this quest to find the other Power Stones. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because after you defeat Valgus, that Power Stone around his neck calls out to the giant Power Stone that everybody has been chasing, and then it absorbs into Valgus' unconscious body, and turns out that was not a good idea. In his weakened state, the Power Stone overwhelms him, and he transforms into this giant, hideous beast, which I swear had to be based on the Jeff Goldblum Fly movie. I'm not going to show you the scene that I'm referring to, but if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. This thing is nasty. He's got his old face stretched over his new Eldritch horror face. For a game that's loaded with all ages cartoony adventure charm, they sure did shove in here a lot of blood, fan service, and body horror when you weren't expecting it. Now, as for this final fight, it's weird. It can range from super easy, barely an inconvenience, to just plain a bullet hell. Because sometimes he just crawls after you for the whole match, and it's pretty easy to deal with. Other times, he will relentlessly spam this homing missile attack that knocks your Power Stones across the stage. And God help you if he crawls his giant body on top of the stone and then just parks it there. Yeah, I lost multiple fights to this guy because he decided to just sit on the magic MacGuffin. I know fighting game final bosses are supposed to be unfair, but this feels like a very unique kind of cheap. But that is the entirety of the first Power Stone, so now it's time to ask the all-important question, how did the game do? How was it received? Was it a success? That's kind of a hard question to answer, because it doesn't look like it did very well. Game Machine magazine reported that in the month it was released in Japan, it was the 18th most popular arcade game. Oof, oh boy. You don't exactly take home a trophy for coming in 18th place. Then, in an interview with official Dreamcast magazine, Hideaki Itsuno flat out confirmed the game did not sell what they wanted, saying it only sold 200,000 copies, which, okay, yes, today, that's bad. That is indeed a flop by today's standards. However, back in 1999, you could be a success selling only 200,000 copies. This was back before games had the massive bloated budgets that they do today, and we had to constantly keep paying higher and higher goals every single year in order to make all that money back. In 99, yeah, you could sell a couple 100,000 copies and that would be a success, so 200,000 doesn't sound that bad to me. I mean, let's look at some of the other fighting games that Capcom was putting out at that time. Darkstalkers 3 sold 400,000 copies. Okay, that's indeed quite a bit more. But you know what? Darkstalkers was an established franchise. It was one of Capcom's better selling fighting games in the 90s. We shouldn't be comparing those things. No. Let's compare Power Stone to another brand new Capcom fighting game from that time, Rival Schools. Rival Schools would only launch to the measly numbers of 500,000 copies. Oh, okay. So I guess the bar here was higher than I was expecting. So okay, it didn't outsell Rival Schools, but it at least outsold Star Gladiator. There is no way it didn't outsell Star Gladiator. How the hell did it not outsell Star Gladiator? What is going on? Hey, you guys know me. You know I'm constantly talking about how games don't have to sell quite as many numbers as the studios say they need to, and you can indeed make a profit from lower sales. But even I'm having some trouble spinning this one. Yeah, the numbers on Power Stone were not very high, and unfortunately, this is that 1-2 combo where the game didn't sell very well, and Capcom had high expectations for it. How high were the expectations? When the game launched in Japan, it was accompanied by a full-blown anime series. Yes, before seeing if the game would even sell a single copy, Capcom bought an entire season of an anime for it. I'm going to guess they probably won this to sell more than 200,000 copies. It ran for 26 episodes, which was pretty standard for animes back in the day, and honestly, it's not bad. It's nothing life-changing, it's not some hidden gem that you have to run out there and find, but you know what? It's a Power Stone cartoon that was made in 1999. I don't think anybody was expecting it to be anything big. Hell, I went into this thing expecting something on the level of the old Darkstalkers cartoon, but nope, I can say it is not that. This is at least watchable. It is totally decent. It does have a bit too much of a formula to each episode. Once you've seen 2 or 3 of them, you understand what every episode is going to be. Edward is just going to kind of fiddle around for about 20 minutes as people keep trying to steal his Power Stone. Then at the end of the episode, he'll transform, beat them, see you next week. It definitely has that Saturday morning cartoon vibe to it, but you know what? So did the art style of the game, so yeah, it kind of fits. And I feel like I should point out, a lot of the characters in here are not quite like they are in the games. Maybe that's just artistic interpretation, or it could be that they were working on this show at the exact same time as the game, so they didn't fully know how the game was going to come out when they were making this. For example, Valgus is not a soldier, he's just a fighter that Edward Falcon looks up to. Ayame is way more serious in here than she is in the game, and Jack is completely different. In here, he's just a weirdo who lives in a cave and is obsessed with his mother. But then again, you probably couldn't have put a serial killer into your all-ages family-friendly adventure show, so I understand. Also, the voice acting, at least the English dub, isn't bad. In fact, there's a surprising number of voice actors in here who I recognize. However, the localization team made sure to drip in here plenty of that late 90s, early 2000s corniness.
Say hello to my shark! This is worse than Shark Week on the Discovery Channel!
Ryoma, you're a samurai from the 19th century. How do you know what that is? But if you can look past that, it's fun enough. If you want to check it out, then you can find the whole thing on YouTube right now. Not legally, of course, but nobody is streaming it legally, so it's that or buy 20-year-old used DVDs on eBay. Either way, Capcom is not making any money off of whatever you decide to do, it's up to you. But back to the game's reception, Itsuno blamed the low sales on multiple factors, a big one being that people bought this game expecting a more traditional fighting game, and they were upset to find that was more of a combination fighting, action, platformer that nobody really knew what to make of. And listen, I'm not going to pretend like that might not have hurt the game. I mean, I spent all this time applying it for being so new and groundbreaking, but it's also true that people don't tend to like a groundbreaking game until many years after it broke that ground. It's hard to sell a game by saying, you might not be ready for this, but your kids are gonna love it. However, I don't really think that's it. If I had to pinpoint one thing that might have hurt this game, it's probably the fact that it came out on the Dreamcast, a console that would go on to be synonymous with not selling well. Aw, poor Dreamcast. You never meant to hurt anybody. You just wanted to know what time it was. Although here's why I say it's hard to answer if this was a success. Because despite not selling what Capcom wanted, they still put out a sequel the very next year.
Without warning, a dark cloud fills the sky, and then a huge shadow blankets the entire room with roar that shakes the entire land. Suddenly, a mysterious floating castle appears out of nowhere. In the blink of an eye, the Power Stone heroes are caught and transported to the floating castle. What will happen to our heroes? Welcome to the Power Stone world.
Yes, when Capcom released Power Stone, they had a lot of faith in the fledgling series. So much faith that they went full steam ahead on a sequel that would release in Japan in April of 2000 and America and Europe in August of the same year. In other words, roughly a year after the first one. Now back in those days, this was pretty typical. Most fighting games could be made quickly, especially if they reused elements from the last game. So many studios wouldn't even wait to see how the first game did. They just say, I'm sure it'll do fine. Go ahead and start working on the sequel right now. or even if they did wait to see the reception and it didn't do quite as well as they wanted, if they still thought there was a fan base there was a pretty good chance that they'd say, you know what, we've got all these assets laying around, it won't cost you that much to make a sequel, go ahead, put something out, see if we can make some of that money back. And I think we might be looking at that second case here, because I don't know the exact budget of this game, but in that interview with Dreamcast Magazine, Hideaki Itsuno said that his 3 philosophies when making a fighting game were, make it so you can play it without reading the booklet, introduce a true innovative feature with each title, and lastly, don't spend too much money on development. So with that in mind, even if the first game didn't meet expectations, this sequel probably wasn't a big gamble for Capcom. It's also probably one of the reasons why Itsuno took the lead on this game. Yeah, in the first game, it definitely felt like Itsuno, the co-director, and Tezuka, the producer, were equally responsible for the look and feel of the game. But for the sequel, Tezuka was out. He had no involvement on this game. And Itsuno was the sole director, so he was now fully in charge. And that wasn't the only shakeup. Power Stone 1 had 3 planners on it. In other words, the people who map out how the game will play and figure out how everything will work. Power Stone 2 had 4 planners. Oh, so they added 1 more? No, they added 3. Yeah, only 1 planner returned from the first game, and then they add 3 new guys. And you might assume this was in response to the underperformance of the first game. Capcom wasn't happy, so they replaced 3/4 of the team. But honestly, I've been covering 90s Capcom fighters for a while now, and I can tell you, there's a pretty good chance that they just said, hey, we need some people on this other game. Take them off Power Stone. Oh crap, now we need people on Power Stone 2. Get these other people from this other game and put them on there. Remember, Itsuno himself, when he had no experience and was brand new to the company, was made a planner on the sequel to Street Fighter II just because he was standing there. This is kind of just what Capcom did for an entire decade. And there's very little info on the actual development of this game. I can only find that 1 interview from Dreamcast Magazine and a tiny additional blurb on the old Dreamcast website. Thank you, Internet Archives. And neither of them share a whole lot. But when you go from Power Stone 1 to Power Stone 2, you can feel how this change in the team ended up changing the game. Because the DNA is similar to the first game. If you play that first game, then you'll understand how the characters move and how they operate. But beyond that, it is a massive shift. You can tell a bunch of new employees with brand new ideas jumped in here, popped open the hood, and just went to town. And you know something? It kind of worked out. Power Stone 2 is great. Let's start with the obvious. There are now 4 characters duking it out at the same time. Yes, the arcade machines and the Dreamcast allowed for 4 controllers, so the game took advantage of that, and you could even connect your Dreamcast to the internet and play with 2 people on each console. Which, granted, doesn't sound like much today, but this was unheard of back in 2000. However, that is probably the simplest of the changes, because this game took the playground atmosphere of the first game and cranked it through the roof. Quite literally on one stage. A lot of people have argued what type of fighting game is Power Stone, and I've always said that it's a mix of an arena fighter and a platform fighter. But Power Stone 2? It's 3D Smash Bros. With all the items turned on. This is one of the most chaotic fighting games that you can play. There is so much happening on screen at all times, and everything is always moving, and that's the game's greatest strength. For starters, there are so many items added to this game, and a lot of them are different types of weapons, big swords, a dozen different types of laser guns, and the team clearly had fun with these, because they've got stuff like the Gut Sword and a Mega Man Mega Buster in here. But then you get the wacky items. Things like a gym that turns you into a bunny, bear traps that trip your enemies up, angel or devil wings that let you just keep jumping indefinitely, animal familiars that just attack alongside you, a microphone that attacks your opponents with a giant sound effect. You can even just pick up your opponents themselves and use them as weapons. It feels like nothing was off the table in this. And sure, you still have the Power Stones, but now as the game goes on, more of them appear until 6 can be on the field at once, meaning 2 characters can go into power change form at the same time. And to make it more interesting, the power change form has been rebalanced. It lasts for much longer. In fact, you can do your big super move twice before it runs out. However, this mode has been severely weakened. It no longer feels like you get the stones and you just dominate the whole game, partly because there's 3 other opponents that you have to worry about, so now your attention is split between them all. But also, you no longer have armor in this state. You can power up, get your big stage-clearing supers ready, and your opponents can still just run up and start comboing you. However, none of that is the big star of the game. No, that's the stages. There's only 5 of them, which does sound a little small, but there is so much crammed into them. Each stage is divided into multiple parts. You'll start in one location, then there will be some kind of a transition stage, and then you'll end up in another stage. For example, on one stage you start by flying on top of a giant airship, but then it starts to break apart, leading to a section where you're now falling through the air and you have to fight as you're falling, struggling to grab an umbrella before you hit the ground. If you grab an umbrella, then you float down gently to safety. If you don't, then you end up eating sidewalk. Then there's an ancient temple where halfway through the floor starts to fall out underneath you, and then everybody has to start running from a giant boulder, really putting away any doubts that there was an Indiana Jones influence on this game. Or my favorite, the stage where you start off by fighting in a factory, but then everybody has to jump on an elevator, and it starts going up, and up, and up, and up, until what the hell is that?
I don't believe it! It's an alien!
Yeah, me neither, surprisingly calm announcer. I don't believe it. Most of the times that I've fought on this elevator stage, the match would be over before we hit the top, and the very first time that we reached that point, I don't think I have ever had a bigger surprise from a stage in a fighting game. These stages are incredible, and combined with all the crazy items and the Power Stones themselves, they're what makes this installment so special. I said when talking about the first game, but the magic of Power Stone is it's just fun. This game was made to be played on the couch with your buddies as all of you are just cracking up at the craziness unfolding in front of you. But beyond just being fun, I would also argue that Power Stone 2 might be one of the most arcadey experiences you could ever imagine. What do I mean by this? I mean this game feels like it was designed for you to just go up to a machine with a group of strangers and play a quick game. For starters, the single-player part of this game is short. You can hop in there and clear out the entire arcade ladder in less than half the time of the last game. Really leaning into that feeling of, oh great, let me go again, I got time, let me do a different run, let me pick a different character, let me go on a different stage, let me pick up some different items, let me see what I can do different this time, I can keep going, one more game. And secondly, and more importantly, the single-player part of this game doesn't really exist. You see, in most fighting games, the arcade ladder is you going up against a computer-controlled opponent, then when you win, you move on to the next one, but if somebody wants to come up and challenge you, then the match will end, they'll challenge you, and if they win, now you're off the machine, and they're moving up the arcade ladder. But in this game, it is a series of 5 fights, with a mid-boss in the 3rd match and a final boss in the 5th fight. However, up to 4 people can play at once, meaning other people aren't necessarily trying to stop you from going up the arcade ladder, they're joining you on it. And yes, you can set the game so that whoever is the last character standing ends up going on to the next round. Or you can set the game so that whoever the last 2 characters are end up moving on to the next round. So you and another player could team up and fight together. Or it could just be an every man for themselves battle royale, but then after you and the exact same other player move on from the first round, and then the second round, then you team up to take on the mid-boss, suddenly you're looking over at this total stranger thinking, wow, we're really fighting side by side. Are we a team? Do you want to work together? Did we just become best friends? Heck, you can even revive characters if they've been knocked out, and I don't mean like a pre-established teammate you have. No, you can run up to any character who has been knocked out, and if you're quick enough, you can bring them back to life, forging a brand new alliance right there on the spot because nothing brings players together like saving them from having to put in more money. This game is something truly unique when you're playing against other people because it's got that competitive rivalry of a fighting game, but it's also got that communal teamwork feeling of a beat 'em up. But speaking of that arcade ladder, let's get into what exactly is the premise of Power Stone 2. A giant castle appears one day out of nowhere, and all the Power Stone fighters are trapped inside, and now they have to fight to escape. And that's really all there is to it. I know I've been saying that there isn't a ton of story to Power Stone throughout this video, but man, this one is really light. It is so bare bones this time, characters don't even get arcade endings. But essentially the idea is that you're making your way through this floating castle, which is why each stage involves traveling from one point to another. Which is kind of crazy to think about because that means that a plane, a submarine, a smaller castle, and an elevator going to space are all inside of this castle. But I kind of like that. This magical palace appears out of a dark cloud one day, and inside of it is a castle that can bend space and time. It definitely feels like a bigger threat than the previous game, but at the same time, it also kind of feels like a fairy tale, which fits the 19th century old world vibe that these games have. And as for the bosses of the game, the mid-boss is known as the Pharaoh Walker, and it's just a giant Sphinx robot. You take its legs out, it falls down, then you punch it in the face, and you're good to go. Or you could get really creative because, as I said, this game is part platformer. So you could jump onto its back, then hop into the giant laser gun that's on its tail, and start firing directly into its head. But if you manage to make it to the end of your arcade run, which really shouldn't be that hard, there are only 5 fights in this game, but if you manage to make it to the end of your arcade run, you'll have to go down a long hallway collecting items off of surprisingly aggressive mannequins, and once you get to the end, you'll face the owner of the castle, the big true villain himself, Rasputin? Oh no, wait, that's another fighting game I have to get to one day. No, this is Dr. Erode, and... well, we don't really know much about him. Yeah, there's no details on him, which is a shame because you take one look at this guy and you can tell the devs clearly had a lot of details in their mind. He's a giant who fights you while he's having dinner, and you can pick up and throw food and silverware at him, and if you do enough damage to his head, then he'll pass out and a giant robot heart will pop out of his chest, and if you hit that, you'll do additional damage. It's all incredibly silly, but you know what? I said this castle feels like something out of a fairy tale. Fighting a giant while they're having dinner is very fairy tale coded. It fits. The fight itself can be rough, but that largely depends on 2 things. How lucky you get with the power stones, because it's random when and if they appear, so you could get all of them right at the start and then just run him over, or it could take you the entire match to just get one. And secondly, who your teammate is. You're going to have a rough time in this match no matter what, because you do still auto-target in this game, and there's a good chance that you'll target Dr. Erode. But if you turn just slightly in the wrong direction, you'll spin completely around and punch your teammate in the face. But if you've got a teammate who knows what they're doing, you're fine. However, if you're not playing with another human being and the computer is player 2, listen, I love Power Stone 1 and 2, but a problem with both these games is the AI can be really dumb. But after you win, all the stones fly off like Dragon Balls, and your characters jump on Falcon's plane and fly off as the castle collapses into nothing. And I know you're getting tired of me saying this by now, but yeah, that's it. That is really all there is to it. There really isn't much here in the way of story. No character endings, no final shot of the Doctor collapsing into his dark cloud, or any explanation about what the heck any of this was. Nope, you win, you fly away, you get the credits, then you get one final shot of Falcon giving a thumbs up as he goes off into the sunset in his beat-up plane. But we can at least mention who these characters are. Outside of the 2 bosses from the first game, all the old characters return. But there were 4 new fighters. Axel, whose name is supposed to be a pun on accelerate because he's a cowboy, but when he transforms with the Power Stones, he turns into a motorcycle-themed Kamen Rider, which might be the coolest collection of words I've ever put together on this show. Pete, who may look like a normal kid, but he's actually a Pinocchio-style wooden puppet that was brought to life by a Power Stone in his body, and he can transform into a toy robot. Gorman is a chef who is looking for fine ingredients, and his power change turns him into a dinosaur. And lastly, there's Julia, a kind, soft-spoken rich noble who has a split personality that is more wild and adventurous that comes out when she uses the Power Stones. And her power change form turns her into a ballet dancer with a swan theme to her. Now, when I was a kid, I always thought this was the weakest of the 4 new characters. Like, don't get me wrong, I wasn't the biggest fan of Gorman or Pete, but at least they turned into something cool. Like, a dinosaur and a robot are actually interesting. Julia turns into a ballet dancer. That's just a person. You can turn into that without the Power Stones. You just gotta take a couple classes. However, now that I'm older, I realize this is clearly supposed to be a reference to Swan Lake, which is a ballet that delves into issues like being at war with yourself, calmness versus chaos, and is often used as a metaphor for split personalities. So, you know what? Yeah, I gotta take it back. That's actually kind of awesome. You guys did your homework on this one. Although while we're discussing these character designs, that was kind of a hot-button issue for this game, because some of the devs thought the characters might have been one of the reasons why the first game didn't sell more. Itsuno himself said in that Dreamcast interview that I keep bringing up, that he thought people didn't like the characters because they didn't look like Dreamcast characters, they looked like Nintendo 64 characters. Whatever the heck that's supposed to mean. But the reporter in that interview, Simon Cox, said they felt the characters were, and I'm quoting here, too cute for Western consumption. They then asked Itsuno and the game's planner, Eiichiro Sasaki, will you be Americanizing these characters for the US market? Which, maybe it's just me, but that feels incredibly offensive. Hey, we know you put all this love and attention and time into these characters. Why don't they look American? Itsuno then replied, quote, I do understand that character design is different in the US. It's more realistic than in Japan, where everything is more colorful and cute. But adapting our title to the US taste would be to abandon our original design and copy another. Remember, many original Japanese game characters were successful in the past. I say this as someone who has made multiple retrospectives on Capcom fighting games. This might be the only time I have heard someone from Capcom in the 2000s say the line, "We will not be changing things to try and appeal to the West." I can practically hear Keiji Inafune in that moment running down the street to try and stop him. If you don't know who Keiji Inafune is or why I'm bringing him up, just watch one of our other Capcom retrospectives. He comes up in almost all of them. Also, I apologize because I'm about to go off on a tangent here, but I have to bring this up. I keep referencing this Dreamcast magazine interview because it's pretty much the only interview anyone did on Power Stone 2. This is maybe the worst interview I have ever read. Listen, you've probably all heard the stories of how bad game journalism was in the early 2000s and how xenophobic it was against Japanese games. Holy crap, reading this article was a flashbang that just brought all that back. This is literally the first paragraph. Simon Cox spent an eventful hour with series creators Hideaki Itsuno and Eiichiro Sasaki at Capcom's HQ in Osaka to blow the doors off Power Stone 2. Okay, so far so good. Maybe he ate some bad sushi. Oh god, here it comes. But he claims the whole thing unfolded this way. If true, the Japanese take their fighting games very, very seriously. Oh, this is about to get super offensive, isn't it? It then says this interview is being reported posthumously because Simon Cox was immediately killed by a Gundam attack after getting to Japan. And then it proceeds to describe the interview with Itsuno and Sasaki as if they were having a martial arts fight with each other during the interview. I tried to rationalize it like, oh, they're describing how they're fighting in the game. When he says Sasaki picked up a chair and threw it at Itsuno's head, he meant the character he was playing as did that in the game. Right? Right? But as the interview went on, I realized, no, that's not what they're doing. There's literally a point in here in which they say something like, and then Sasaki kicked Itsuno out of a window where he fell 6 floors before Itsuno re-emerged and threw a satellite dish at Sasaki, and then Itsuno told me about the graphics in the game. But then Sasaki jumped out of the wreckage with a machine gun. And I'm not kidding you. This is actually how they decided to write the entire interview. This is the section of the page that they dedicated to talking about how the camera works in the game. This is how much of that section is the actual interview where they talk about the camera. The rest of all this is a fanfic about Itsuno and Sasaki throwing each other around and tossing weapons at each other. If you have ever heard stories of game journalists in the 2000s and you thought to yourself, no way was it that bad, I present to you it being that bad. But back to the topic at hand, that's all there was for the arcade release of Power Stone 2, but when it came to the Dreamcast, there was some additional content. For starters, there was an adventure mode, which was basically just a roguelike mode where you have no continues but you collect coins, then you can go into a shop and use those coins to buy items or fuse items together to create brand new weapons, and there were 2 secret characters. Edward Falcon's father, Pride Falcon, who is basically just a reskin of his son, but he does have a unique super move in his power change form, so that's something. And the other secret character is Mel, who is actually the character who runs the in-game item shop. It's nice that they add her, but she was definitely a last-minute addition. She's got the same moveset as Julia, and her power change form just gives her angel wings, and they're not even unique angel wings. This is just an item that any character in the game can pick up and use. Although she does get 2 unique super moves. She can either toss coins at you, or drop a bunch of money bags on top of you, which admittedly does not sound like the worst super in the world to get hit with. And that was it for Power Stone 2, and while sales figures aren't available for this game, it's believed that it sold less than the first one. Not only did it not get any further installments, implying Capcom wasn't happy with the sales numbers, but also the original game released on the Dreamcast at launch, while this one released a year later, and yeah, the Dreamcast really did drop off that fast. Year 0 of the Dreamcast? Healthy, optimistic. Year 1? Struggling. Year 2? Dead. However, the story of Power Stone didn't end there, because it would receive another chance at life in 2006 on the PlayStation Portable. Not exactly the console I would expect for a fighting game that allows up to 4 players, but hey, it's better than nothing. And you know something? This is actually a really good port. It's got both Power Stone 1 and 2, the home release versions, so it includes all the special bonus modes in there, and it includes the games that were on the Dreamcast memory card, which is such a nice detail. That is totally something that people were not expecting. Nobody was going to be mad if you left that out. So it was awesome that they decided to go that extra mile, but then they went like 5 extra miles, and they went back and put the Power Stone 2 characters into Power Stone 1, and then they added the bosses from Power Stone 1 into Power Stone 2. They didn't give any of them arcade endings, but that is still crazy, especially considering that Power Stone 1 and 2 are similar, but they still play slightly differently, so they had to adapt the characters into each game. That's the kind of detail that you hear people saying, well, why can't they do this in a collection? And then someone has to explain to you why that's crazy and it could never ever happen. And yet the Power Stone guys actually did it. But unfortunately, that version is locked only to the PlayStation Portable, so yeah, you're not likely to see it anytime soon. Luckily, you don't need to worry about that, because we got another collection of Power Stone. For years and years, people kept begging for these games to get a re-release on a modern-day console that people have access to and actually own. People kept saying it would be amazing on the Switch, including the game's creator, Takeshi Tezuka, who brought this up multiple times over the years. But finally, in 2025, the Capcom Fine Collection 2 was released, bringing so many older forgotten titles back, and this collection is amazing. This thing was made with pure passion from people who love the hell out of Capcom Fine games. It looks great, it runs great, it's got smooth rollback and tons of bonus art. It's maybe the best tribute you could possibly get to these games. So even if we're never getting another Power Stone game, it is incredible that we got a collection like this that can let the game live on. However, speaking of never getting another Power Stone, that brings us to a weird part of this video. Because you'd think that there wouldn't be anything else to say about this title, and in all honesty, there isn't. But when I do these retrospectives, I need to cover all the major stories revolving around these titles. And for several years, Power Stone was in a very weird place. But to understand that, we will be forced to descend into a dark, evil, filthy place that normally I dare not tread. But for this game, we must set foot into the rumor mill. Yeah, most people wouldn't believe this small fan-favorite game from a dead console would have drummed up a ton of rumors over the years, but there is one that has left these fans perplexed. In November of 2020, Capcom suffered a rather severe cyber attack. Approximately 1 terabyte of data was stolen, including Visa records of employees, banking records, and just vague business information. But then a few days after this data breach was made public, a leak appeared on the internet, claiming that it had all of Capcom's plans for the next 4 years. And I remember so many people talking about this like it was real. Like, oh, this is really top secret information and now it's made public to everyone. But I didn't even bother looking at it because everything I heard sounded like nonsense to me. Yeah, listen, you might have noticed, I don't talk about rumors or leaks all that much on this channel because it's almost always bullcrap. It's just some random fan throwing out something they made up to make people talk, and this was no exception. This was just stupid. Who would believe any of this? I mean, there was stuff in there like a Captain Commando game, a Final Fight remake. No way were those going to happen. Street Fighter 6? Okay, well, yeah, no doubt. We all knew that was coming. That doesn't mean anything. You don't get any points for that. A Resident Evil 4 remake? I mean, okay, they got that one right, but Capcom was doing a lot of Resident Evil remakes. That still seemed like a safe bet. That doesn't mean anything. Dragon's Dogma 2? Wait. Hold up, that one actually happened. And that was kind of a crazy call. Nobody was predicting that. I mean, it didn't happen in 2022 like the leak said, but it was announced in 2023. That's really close. Hold up. Was this leak real? Yeah, like I said, leaks come and go, and I try to never listen to them because 99% of the time, it's just BS. But the fact that we knew Capcom had a huge chunk of their info stolen right before the leak dropped had a lot of people talking. But then as time went on, everyone kind of forgot about it. until the Resident Evil 4 remake got announced, and then suddenly people started arguing about all over again. Then it died down again, until Dragon's Dogma 2 got announced, and people started arguing whether or not it was real once again. Yeah, this was the leak that just refused to die. Every time that people thought, okay, it's fake, we're not listening to it anymore, something new happened that brought it right back into the forefront all over again. So why am I bringing this up? Because that leak said that in 2024, there would be a brand new Power Stone game. And as you can imagine, Power Stone fans were very normal about that. So for years, there were all these speculations. Every time that it felt like this might be fake, another game got confirmed. This all led up to the release of the Capcom Fighting Collection 2 in 2025, which just raised further questions. Was the leak just referring to this? Did they just see some info that Power Stone might be on the way in some form and they assumed it'd be a new game, but it was actually referring to this? No. That couldn't possibly be happening. The first fighting game collection wasn't even a thing when that leak came out. No way did they know at that time that they were going to make a second fighting game collection. So maybe that Power Stone game was in the works, but now they're putting out this fighting collection to test the waters and see if people want a brand new Power Stone? No. Capcom has said multiple times they've stopped doing the Capcom test, so that can't be what this is. And the cherry on top of all this, right after this collection got announced, and I'm talking right after, just a few days after the trailer dropped, Hideaki Itsuno announced that he would be leaving Capcom after working there for 30 years. And it was at this point that the rumor mill that had already been soaked in oily rags was set ablaze. People started asking, okay, so there was a Power Stone game in that leak that had some things that were true, and now the guy who directed Power Stone is leaving at the same time that this collection is coming out? So was there a new Power Stone that was in development, but then they canceled it, and then they decided to just put out this collection instead, and Hideaki Itsuno is mad about that, so that's why he's leaving? As you can probably guess by now, like the majority of leaks, this one was complete crap. All of it was just a load of BS and a handful of lucky guesses. At best. At best! It was maybe some vague ideas that Capcom wrote down. But it definitely was not an official schedule. And Itsuno confirmed himself, leaving Capcom had nothing to do with Power Stone or Rival Schools or any of the other games that he had worked on over the years that had not gotten new installments. He told the Video Game Chronicle in 2025 that he left because there are fewer AAA games being made these days, and he's getting older. And he realized if he stayed at Capcom, he'd only be making Devil May Cry and Dragon's Dogma games for the rest of his life, so he got out to work on other titles while he still could. My point is, normally leaks pop up and then die instantly, but because this one lined things out for half a decade, and it got some of them right, this rumor just would not go away, and as a result, people kept talking about Power Stone for 4 years. And I'd like to remind you, the entire lifespan of Power Stone was 2 years. As I have said multiple times, I do not like talking about leaks unless they're important. But when you're talking about the history of Power Stone, this was important because for 4 years, it just made it a really weird time to be a Power Stone fan. But that was it. After this, there were no more updates to talk about with Power Stone. The tale of one of Capcom's wildest ideas for a fighting game came to a close, and since we're at the end, there's a very important question that we have to answer. What exactly is this game? Is it even a fighting game? People have argued over this for years. Heck, even the game's developers have questioned it. In that interview with Dreamcast Magazine, Hideaki Itsuno said he didn't even consider the first Power Stone to be a fighting game. He thought it was an action game. And the game's planner Ichiro Sasaki added, the fighting game image was not in fact a good thing for Power Stone. It is still possible to play it as a fighting game, but you'll miss so much of the fun. And while the question of what is and isn't a fighting game is a far grayer topic than you might think, and I'm fully aware it is insane to argue with a game's director about what their own game is, yeah, of course Power Stone is a fighting game. It's you and an opponent using combat to drain each other's life points down to 0. It's totally a fighter. But what type of fighting game is it? A lot of people have tried to place labels on Power Stone: 3D fighter, arena fighter, platform fighter, but as I said earlier, it doesn't really fit into any of those boxes. It's more of a merger of all of them at once. And because of that, Power Stone really is kind of its own thing. I've always referred to Power Stone as a party fighter, a fighting game where it's a big open playground full of interactables and the premise is to play with a large group of other people in a casual setting, and the focus of the game is more on big swings rather than on smaller, more intricate details of combat. In other words, macro level tactics versus micro level tactics. And because of that, Power Stone has always sat in a weird place in the fighting game community, because it does have a scene. There are dedicated Power Stone players out there, but tournaments for it are rare. Don't get me wrong, there are some, but in all fairness, if you look around hard enough, you'll find a tournament for basically everything. Neo Geo Turf Masters gets tournaments at majors. However, if you do go to a major tournament, you might not see it on the schedule, but if you look around, you will definitely find a group of people over in the corner playing Power Stone. And if you can't find it, you can just stand up and call out, "Hey, does anyone want to play some Power Stone?" There will be people jumping in because it is insanely fun. I said all the way back when talking about the very first game, it's a game that thrives on the couch with your buddies when you're all just having a good time. It's a game where even if people aren't getting serious about it on the competitive scene, everyone can enjoy it because it has such a big casual appeal. In other words, it's exactly what Tezuka wanted. He set out to create something that had never been seen before, and something that could be enjoyed on a casual level, and the team behind this game succeeded. But here's what's really special about Power Stone. We never got another installment after Power Stone 2, but the game did have its fans. And you know what happens when you create something new? Something that has never been seen before? That reaches an audience, even if it's a tiny cult following? It leaves an impact. And since the release of Power Stone, we have seen that impact. The team behind this game created something that the world had never seen before, and a lot of fans out there said, "I really want to see more stuff like this. And if no one is making it, I'm going to make it myself." So many games have come out since the last Power Stone that have tried to scratch the itch that was left by Power Stone. There's Last Fight, a fun classic brawler based on the French comic Last Man. There's Mighty Fight Federation, an incredibly creative and upbeat title featuring not only a full cast of original characters, but also several indie game guest stars. Then you got Shrek Super Slam, which, okay, yes, is completely unhinged and even borderline kusogi, but shockingly enough, it has a fairly dedicated competitive audience. I guarantee many of you did not expect those words to come out of my mouth. And then, of course, there's the one, the only... Yeah, that's right, surprise everybody, this whole video was just a trap to get you all to listen to me talk about Gigabash again. Somebody get Kevin on the phone and tell him we need a new thumbnail because this is now the Gigabash retrospective. Gigabash released in 2022 as a kaiju-themed fighter. It's an amazingly charming game with incredibly fun combat, great character designs, and has received so much DLC, including gaining recognition from the big boys of kaiju fame such as Godzilla, Gamera, and Ultraman. And when I picked this game up a few years ago, I instantly fell in love with it. Combat was so smooth, and the way that you could jump around and climb on everything gave you so much freedom, and there were so many fun mini games and all these amazing items that you could pick up and throw. But on top of that, everything about this game just felt familiar. There was something about this game that just felt like I was seeing an old friend, like I had been here before. And then a year later, I was researching the development of this game for a video that may or may not still be coming out, stay tuned. But I was looking up interviews with the developers, and lo and behold, I ran into this moment.
And we were also inspired by a lot of very great games like Power Stone.
And as soon as I heard that, my eyes lit up and I just said, that's it. That's what this reminds me of. Yes, Power Stone was one of the inspirations for this game. A game that released over 2 decades after Power Stone 2 and is still going to this day. And that's what I think is the big lesson of Power Stone. These developers wanted to create something new. And when you think outside the box, when you're willing to get creative, then what you end up making today is the inspiration of tomorrow. Even if the game didn't reach a ton of people, the people it reached remembered it, and they still cherish it to this day. And if those developers had played it safe, nobody would still be thinking about this game. It would just be that, oh yeah, Capcom made like another 3D fighter game. I think it was like Power something. But that unique combination of originality and fun is what kept it around. Tezuka himself said it best. We weren't just aping current trends or reiterating what came before, and that has contributed to its lasting appeal. In the world of fighting games, originality is so important, and we see that to this day. There are so many smaller indie fighting games out there that are trying really unique stuff. And even if those games don't have the backing of major studios or massive, huge, bloated budgets, that originality and creativity is going to help them stick around for years to come. And a game like Power Stone proves that's possible. Because even if Power Stone didn't do major sales when it was originally released, the creativity behind it was able to give it a legacy. And that legacy would go on to inspire innovative games today. And those new innovative games today are going to go on to inspire the new innovative games of tomorrow. In the end, Power Stone truly is a hidden gem. It's a treasure, and one that could only be found by a team of developers with an adventurous spirit who weren't afraid to set off for a new horizon. There we go. Thank you guys very much for tuning in to the Power Stone retrospective. As I said, this is one that I've been wanting to do for the longest time. If you want more content from us, then you can sign up for our Patreon in the description down below, and you'll get your name in the credits like all these fine folks here, or maybe some bonus videos every now and again. Also, if you want to help this channel grow, the best way that you can do that is just to spread these videos around, tell everybody about them. I really do appreciate that, and I mean that more than ever. Here, at the end of the video, I'm going off script because I do have to share this with you guys. The last retrospective that we did was on Under Night in Birth. Had a lot of fun making that one. A lot of people seem to really enjoy it. However, for some reason, YouTube decided to just completely hide the video. Like, they made it 100% unsearchable after I released it. Like, it was up for about 2 days, and then after those 2 days, YouTube was just like, nobody can find this. It will not show up in any search engines. You can type in the entire name of the video. It will not pop up. And I had people contacting me saying, hey, I can't find this video anymore. It just appears to be gone. Did something go wrong? I don't know what happened. YouTube just decided they were not going to share it with anyone. Eventually, I was able to correct it. I just changed the title of the video, and apparently that caused YouTube to reboot itself and re-examine the video and go, oh yeah, it's fine now. But I wanted to bring this up because, yeah, it kind of bummed me out that, oh, I spent all this time making this video and nobody can search for the video, nobody can find it. But then I stopped and I realized, wait, if nobody can search for the video, that means all the views that video has gotten have been from people sharing the video manually. Like actually going to other people and saying, you need to watch this. And the moment that I realized that actually kind of knocked me over a little bit. I was like, oh wow, you guys really are doing a lot of work to spread these videos around. So yeah, I just wanted to come in here and say, thank you guys. I now have actual evidence that you guys spreading these videos around does help a whole lot. I really do appreciate it. I just wanted to put that out there for all you guys. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. Make sure that you check the description down there for a link to all of Kevin's stuff. Once again, he is the artist who did the thumbnail for this video. He is a legend, and I really appreciate him doing that thumbnail. It was great getting a chance to work with him. And big thank you to Jon Cartwright for doing the opening narration in that intro. I originally was not going to even do opening narration for this video. It's an idea that I had at the last minute, and Jon Cartwright came through and was able to do that. He is a wonderful person, a super talented voice actor, and he is also part of the Good Vibes gaming team, and that is a wonderful channel. If you have never checked out their channel, make sure you go and subscribe to them as well. I'll be putting all those links in the description down below. Also, you can find the link to the survey about that anime documentary that I mentioned at the very beginning of the video down in the description below. Make sure that you go and fill that out. It will help them to get this documentary made. They are wonderful people. I have worked with them before. I cannot wait to see what they do with this documentary. But they need you to fill that out. But there we go. That's all I want to say. Thank you all once again for tuning in. Stay safe out there, and come back next time. And also go play Power Stone. And also Gigabash. Bye, everybody!